I wasn't picking on anybody. Hopefully you understood it was all there to encourage. All right? Because some of you are thinking, oh, but you don't know how horrible. Listen, I've heard some of the most horrendous things that anybody can hear. I counsel people, okay? Everything from physical abuses, sexual abuses, emotional abuses, demonic abuses, spiritual, whatever you can think of, I've heard it. So it's not that I don't have any empathy for it, but you can choose to no longer allow it to continue to rule your life and ruin where you are, but come out and be free of it and move forward. Now, there's a process to that. It doesn't just happen instantaneously, but you have to first choose to say, I'm going to start to walk. He says you have to be drawn and you have to walk towards the light. Take steps. Maybe they're small and they're not all that often, but you're taking them, and eventually you'll take a little bit bigger steps and a little bit more often, and there's a little momentum going as you start walking towards that light. Maybe some of you feel like you're crawling. I don't care. That's fine. Move towards the light, even if you're crawling. Just keep going forward. Don't quit. All right, we talk about having heart and not having a strong mind. Don't quit. Keep going, keep going. Why? Because he said you could. How do I know? Because he called you. He said if he called you, you can get there. You know, he's not going to ever sit there going, well, I guess I was wrong about that one. That doesn't mean all of you get there. If you don't get there, it's your fault, not his. Just so you know. That's your choice. He knew when he called you that you could get there from where you are, period. The rest is now in your hands. What do you do with that? Okay? Amen. All right, this is called the Afterburn. So if you got a comment or question, you can raise your hand. If you're on live stream, Rob and Kurt will take care of that. Please, if you're on live stream, and now that they've taken the chat lock off so that there's interaction, let's be respectful of the fact that this is a service here on Shabbat. And if you don't agree with some of the things, or maybe you don't agree with anything I said, that's fine. You can contact me directly for that. But let's be respectful and not harass the people in the room just because you don't agree with something that was said. Okay, Steve, go ahead.
Okay. Back in John 3:18, doesn't 1 John 2:4, isn't that connected with the level of our belief?
Yes. Okay, so 1 John 2:4 is the one that says, I know him and doesn't keep the commands are liars. So, okay. And I think I quoted that, but yes, I mean, there is a connection. Look, especially when you're talking about the same writer. John is a very, very consistent writer. Some of the points he makes in the Gospel of John are the same thematically connected points in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. I mean, he has the things that are important in his message, the things that he saw and witnessed that he feels you need to understand and embrace and fully get. Okay, same thing with Paul. Paul is very consistent throughout his letters as the things that he feels are important. You know, so when you see people who write more than one thing, you can see those kind of things. Peter's the same way. He's got his issues and his things that he wants to talk about, and that his piece of the puzzle that he feels is his piece to emphasize. All right? And John emphasizes the relationship. Okay, John's all about us in our relationship with Yeshua, with the truth. So he says, if you say you know him and have a relationship and don't keep his commandments, you're a liar. It's in John where he says, I am the truth, the way, and the life. You see Yeshua saying that's in John where we see that if you know the truth will set you free. It's John that talks about those relational things. And so you see that also in 1 John. Rabbi Tom?
Thank you. I know you covered this in the Father and the Son. Do you know the Father and the Son teaching? But in John 1:14, I wonder if you could clarify again this term brought forth. It says, as of and only brought forth of a Father.
Okay, so I think that anything that we would say there would be a complete guess because we're not really sure how Yeshua comes. Was it just the Father at one point and then brought forth out of the Father? We now have this thing called the Word. It says in the beginning there was two, how that all comes about. But it's not the same as being birthed, okay, is what we're trying to say. That this is something that he emanates from, he manifests from, he somehow comes out from the originator of the Father. Again, remember, we are so vastly, inadequately equipped to understand those things of Elohim as human beings. Now, we're a whole lot more equipped than if we were like a lesser developed animal, or even things like all the way down to an amoeba. I mean, we're certainly more intellectually equipped than, say, a fish or a bird or something like that. But still, as smart as we are, as evolved as we are as far as our intellect, we're so smart, we're so highly developed. I don't mean evolved like from evolution, but you know what I'm saying? We're so highly developed. We still are so nowhere near up to the, capacity to understand that which is of Elohim. In such a very limited way, he gives us some insight. So that's all we have there in John 1:14.
Yeah, I was going to say sometimes I feel like an amoeba.
Yeah, okay. All right. And so, this is really, I think, a perspective. The reason I choose the amoeba, because an amoeba is a single cell little thing compared to the millions or billions of cells that are in a human being. I think that comparison is probably close in an order of scale to us to him. Okay? Because there are those that, and the evolutionists want to compare us to, say, the monkeys. And so in order of scale, they can do a lot of things that we can do. So in order of scale, there isn't as much difference in some of the things that they can maybe understand. But when you take an amoeba to a human being, now we got an order of scale that's tremendous. Okay, in terms of the capacity that we have versus that. And I think that there's probably a reasonably close comparison to that from us to him. Okay? And so that's the greatest comparison that I can give you in terms of making sure we have that magnitude of size difference, of scale. Okay, who's next?
Yeah, thank you. I'm studying Ephesians, and you had...
Stand up.
Yeah. I'm studying Ephesians, and it's been something that's been puzzling me a lot about the predeterminism versus, free will. And I think you mentioned elect in what you were teaching today, and it was in relationship to, you're not talking about elect or anything like that. So I wonder if you've already taught, Arminian versus Calvinism or any of that, or what your thoughts are around all that.
No, I'm actually Lithuanian and Austrian, so I don't... Look, I wasn't ever raised in Christianity, so when people talk about Arminian versus Calvin, and I'm like, Calvin and Hobbes? I don't know. What are you talking, I really don't know those particular belief systems that well to know which is which. But I will tell you that there was an Are You Covenanted part, something where I got into the idea of called and chosen. And it may have actually been pulled out as an in focus. Did we do that as an in focus at some point? Or I don't think so. But anyway, I don't know which Are You Covenanted it was in, but I got heavily into the called versus chosen and kind of explained that out. And that's what deals with this whole predetermination versus free will. And I think, right, does that make sense? Does everybody remember that? I think that dealt with that issue. So he does call us. Remember, he's outside of time and space. So he already knows what we will do. Not that it's predetermined or predestined, but when the time is not an issue, he can already see it all play out in advance while, because there's no time. So he calls you knowing what you will do if he calls you. Like he can run through every scenario in his head and say, okay, if I do this with that person, this is what they will do. Not because I make them do it, so it's not a predestination, but this is because of the choices that they will make. Okay? So you still have the free will. He just already knows what you will do with your free will. That's kind of like one of those loops that gets a little weird, but does that make sense? Okay? You have the free will, but since there's no time limitation for him, he knows the end from the beginning. He can see all things as if they're at the same time. Okay? With that being said, he knows what you will do because he sees it as if it's already done. And so that's not a predestined where you have no choice. He just knows the choices you'll make. Okay? So hopefully that unravels that a little bit. Okay, good. I mean, that's a really great question. It's a tough thing for people. Well, if we have free will, well, just remember, though, he can see it all play through. Yeshua was sacrificed or slain before the foundation of the earth. That day when he got put on that stake, he already knew about that day before a few thousand years earlier before we ever got anywhere near that day. Okay? Because, and what he said to Judas, Judas, do what you got to do. He already knew. But not because Judas didn't have any free will, but because he knew what Judas's choice would be. Okay? And so you still have the free will. So he knows that you can, from here, get there. He also knows whether you get there or not, because he's already seen it. He's not going to tell you up front. But the point is, you need to know that you can get there from here. Because he picked you knowing that that was something you could do. But he also knows the end from the beginning, so he also knows who gets in and who doesn't, because he's already seen it play out. Okay? All right, next. Okay, so Manny gave the quote that I gave from that teaching, which was, he decides who's called and when they're called. You decide whether or not you're chosen. You get to choose. Okay? He says, many are called, a few are chosen. Okay? You get to be, by your own choices, one of the chosen. He decides who to call. And the difference is simply what you do with your call. Okay? And that is explained, like I said, in Are You Covenanted part, whatever. I don't remember what part it was in. Okay. But I'm pretty sure it was in the Are You Covenanted series. After all, it's 55 parts. It was probably in there somewhere. Excuse me. All right, where's the mic? Rick.
Yeah, I just had an observation. Whoever believes in me or believes in him, I've heard it said before, you could take the word believes and split it into two words, be lives or lives in him. And Yeshua constantly, particularly in John 15, talks about staying in me. He who stays in me and he who does not stay in me. And in one verse he says, he who stays in me will not walk in darkness. So it's a choice. Who practices evil or practices walking in the light is, to me, staying in him. So if we focus on that and stay in him, and we possess the light and allow that light to guide our path and consciously walk in the light of the path rather than consciously walking or practicing in the darkness, isn't that the same correlation?
Good point. I mean, look, the whole point of this was so we could start to really get a fuller understanding of darkness and light, and that's, Rick is trying to show you that, whether we stay in him or not is part of that. Because remember, darkness is not within the structure. You could be in a different structure, a wrong structure, or under no structure. But if you're going to come under his authority, his structure, then you're in the light. Okay? Who's next?
Okay, from Rebecca Roth. It says, Rabbi, when you spoke of being in the dark and partially in the light, I connected 1 Kings 18:21. Do you see a connection as well?
Yeah, I can see how that could be part of it. First Kings 18:21 is Eliyahu. Elijah is talking to the people saying, how long would you keep hopping between two opinions? If Yahweh's Elohim, follow him, and if Baal, follow him. Okay, and the people didn't answer a word because they wanted to hop back and forth. Okay, so that's a good verse for that. Appreciate that reference.
Okay, from Pete and Brenda Lamb says, I'm confused about what Yeshua meant in John 9:5 when he said, while I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world. Isn't he still the light of the world?
Okay, so, we were talking about the idea of, remember, not just him physically, okay? While Torah observance, while the truth is in the world, he's the light of the world. But the world is wanting to get rid of all that. The world is trying to, rid itself of that. And the world is becoming more and more in darkness. So when you're looking at John 9:5, he says, while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Yes. Just like in John 1, just like in Genesis 1. Light was sent into the darkness and brought the chaos and confusion into order. But when the light is taken away from the world and light is rejected from the world goes into darkness, chaos, confusion, etc. And so this is not just when he is physically here, but it has to do with the people embracing all that he is. And that's when we embrace him as truth, as Torah, as the word, as the way, all those things. Okay?
Jonathan Thompson, so we can embrace that there are certain darknesses Abba causes or allows in life, and along this Torah observant walk, so that the works of Elohim may be manifested, so we can choose the path of light.
Yes. Okay, yes. He does allow certain things to happen with the knowledge that he's going to use it as an opportunity to bring people to see him more. Okay?
Olivia and Janet Hoffman says,
Hold on. I just thought of something to add to that. It happens occasionally. You know, in the teaching, Discovering Your Identity, make a note of that, children. Okay. In the teaching, Discovering Your Identity, there's a point where Rehoboam wants to go and, go after Jeroboam to reunite the kingdom. And Yah says, no, this I'm going to allow because it serves my purpose. He says, this split is of me. This division is of me. He's not really saying it's of me, meaning I caused it. He's saying it serves a purpose ultimately in my plan. He could see how it would play out through time and be a part of what he was trying to do. So he allowed it, even though, now, to go back to predestination and free will, Rehoboam could have gone. And Yah saw that he would have gone. But he decided to insert himself and say, no, leave this alone because this is going to serve a purpose of mine. Now, there are other times where people go to do things that he doesn't need to say anything because he allows it, knowing full well it's going to cause a purpose of his. So sometimes he inserts himself, sometimes he doesn't. I mean, Yeshua chose, Judas knowing what he would do. And that was his call and his role to do, knowing that he would be a part of the 12 up to a point, and at the right moment, he was going to be the catalyst to lead to the death, burial, and resurrection. Now, it's not that Judas didn't have a choice. Judas was chosen because he would make that choice. He had the free will to make other choices, but he already knew the choices he would make. That's what it comes down to, okay? When he chose Abram knowing the choices Abram would make. He chose Moses knowing what Moses would do. I mean, he chooses men and women at times because he knows what they will do. Not because they were predestined and had no choice. But he understands and knows the kind of choices they will make. Or specific choices they make. He sees the end from the beginning. All right, next question.
From Olivia and Janet Hoffman, says, Rabbi, John chapter 3, verse 21, is this connected to John 10, verse 4? Also, it reminded me of Joseph and how Elohim was with him because he was a righteous man.
Say the last part again.
It says, also, it reminded me of Joseph and how Elohim was with him because he was a righteous man.
Yeah, no, I could see that. I'm sorry, I just missed the last part because I was reading the verse in John 10. In John 10:4, it says that when he has brought out his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. And we covered that in Father and the Son, starting around part 6, where we deal with the sheep. My sheep know my voice. So, that does fit into what we were reading in John chapter 3 and in other places. I don't remember I think you said John 3. So, yes. Look, John is consistently focusing on the things Yeshua said that were making these specific points. This was to John the most important parts of the message. So that's what John focused on. Okay, he didn't focus on the same things that maybe Matthew or Mark or Luke did, because these to John were the key elements that the people needed to know and understand about Yeshua and their relationship with him and with each other. And so this had to do with hearing his voice, following him, submitting to him, coming under structure, being in light and not darkness, and those kind of things. Okay?
From the Starkle clan, says, question, Rabbi, can you elaborate on John 9:4? What does Yeshua mean when he says, night is coming, no man will be able to work?
Yeah, I think I covered that a little bit. You know, we're guessing, but I'm going to say that, you know, we, like the Israelites have experienced throughout history many times, have come into times where they were oppressed by a dominant force that did not allow for them to do anything. See, you have freedom generally to do all of Torah right now. There's many times in history when that was not possible. Okay? And so under this, you know, era that we're in this country, if you're here in the U.S. or Canada, et cetera, you pretty much are free to do almost, in most countries actually, you're pretty much free, but there's still enough countries out there where, you know, if you tried to keep Sabbath, but they want you to work. You know, my wife's family, you know, escaped out of Yugoslavia because they were basically going to have to deal with going maybe to jail if they were trying to keep Shabbat. They weren't going to send the children to school on Shabbat. They didn't, you know, these are things that could get you arrested. And we actually knew some people in a congregation in Knoxville who had been arrested for Sabbath keeping, who were Romanian. And so there are countries and places where trying to keep commandments is literally not allowed. You can't, they will arrest you. So that would be a time that's, for them, they're in the night, not the day. Okay? So night is coming. Guess what's going to happen during the tribulation? Night is coming. Okay? So you need to be getting this under your belt and figured out and practiced and clear while it is day.
Chris, Andy, Ollie, Dennis says, question, John 3:16, being born from darkness into light, thinking of the womb, there is darkness/protection being hidden. Do we have darknesses for our protection like Yeshua was hidden?
Well, I mean, it's more like we talk about, it's a natural state at the beginning. It's a place where something is birthed from. You know, we use the example of literally when you're born, you're coming from darkness into light, okay? You know, something is hidden for later revealing. Look, the baby for 9 months is hidden for later revealing. Now, of course, we can peek a little bit with, like, you know, doing the sonograms and things, whatever. We can, like, go ahead and look. But generally, they weren't able to do that back in those days. I mean, something was hidden to be revealed, all right? So those metaphors are all there. And generally, there's, you know, in some cases, there's a protection. There's a barrier to keep something out or in, et cetera. And in the darkness, there is some protection. You know, for some of your family members, I'm going to go out on a limb here, I guess, but for some of your family members, it is better that they don't have that call yet because they're not ready to make those choices. Remember, he called you because he knew from that point you could get there. Well, maybe a lot of people you know, even though you want them to know now, this is not the point yet where they could get there from. They haven't had enough experiences in their lives and things to get them to the point where they're ready to give up their sovereignty and come under his sovereignty. Okay? So in some sense, they're being protected in the darkness, because they're not coming under judgment in the darkness, because they have the only judgment comes in those that have light, should have had light, was exposed to light, shared with light, whatever. The ones who were called, who choose to be in the darkness. There's no judgment of those who were starting in darkness and nobody ever gave them the light. And when I say nobody, I mean the Father or Son has not called them out into the light. So maybe for some of them, they're actually in a better place. I know it doesn't look like it. I mean, being in darkness is still a pretty horrible place to be. And I said, look, a place where something is hidden for later revealing, but this can also be a frightening place. All right, next question.
From Nate, says, question, in John 9:4, it sounds like Yeshua is saying he needs to do this before Sabbath starts. But in 9:14, it says he did this on the Sabbath day.
9:4. Okay, I mean, that would be another way to possibly look at it. It says, look, it is necessary to work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming, meaning the Sabbath is about to start. I guess you could look at it that way. And then in 14, it says, it was a Sabbath when Yeshua made the clay and opened his eyes, which to me, that makes the point that that is not the reading for 9:4. Okay? 9:4 has nothing to do with it being about to be the Sabbath. It says he opened the guy's eyes on the Sabbath anyway. So that's not connected. That's not the right connection there. Okay? It's a darkness-light comparison. It's just using night and day.
All right, from Cheryl W. Can trials sometimes be to teach us strength in overcoming in general instead of learning a specific lesson?
I'm sorry, say it one more time.
Can trials sometimes be to teach us strength in overcoming in general instead of learning a specific lesson?
Absolutely.
From Tracy Waymeyer, says, Rabbi, so Yeshayahu 45, 5 through 7 addresses this in that Yahweh creates both the light and the darkness because we have not truly known him.
Okay, yeah, because in verse 7 it talks about forming light and creating darkness, making peace and creating evil. I, Yahweh, do all these. Look, he causes and allows these things to happen because they are part of his way of filtering through and helping us to grow and mature the way he needs us to grow and mature. Okay? Some of you will only embrace so much light until he gives you more darkness to want you to create in you a mindset of wanting more light. Because some of you get a little bit of light and you're satisfied. And then you stop growing. So then he causes some darkness to come in your life so that you realize you need more light.
A comment from Diane Rodriguez says, I had so many questions, so very confused, but your teaching style is so clarifying. I am so blessed to have found your site, pun somewhat intended.
I appreciate that.
All right. From Olivia and Janet Hoffman, another comment says, Dear Rabbi, John chapter 3, verse 20, this does not include those like me who struggle with a specific sin, but keep coming to him in repentance and keep working at it until it ceases completely.
Yeah, this is talking about the ones who don't come to the light. Okay, we're going to struggle in staying in the light, and we're going to get off the path and then come back and get off the path and then come back. But this is for those who are practicing, that which is against what Yahweh intended it to be, and have loved less the light compared to the darkness, and do not come to the light. Okay? Look, this is, I think, and I was very excited to do this teaching because I really, not just this one today, but I mean darkness and light in general. I think this is a really important understanding. This is a metaphor. It's a descriptor that is used throughout scriptures to help us understand his perspective on things and how he uses light and darkness. And by the way, this is also, hopefully, and I'll stir the pot a little bit while we're waiting for the children, part of what should help settle the argument on those who are now starting to embrace that the day starts in the morning. Okay? Because there's a lot of Sabbath keepers out there that are starting to do sun up to sun up as opposed to sunset to sunset. But the sunset gives us the imagery of darkness into light. The Rosh Chodesh coming out of a dark moon or into the crescent as opposed to the new moon being a full moon. There are those out there embracing a full moon, new moon. Doesn't make any sense. It doesn't maintain the picture of darkness into light. The universe started out darkness and then light was brought into it. Okay? And physical light wasn't even brought into it until day 4. Okay, so that's a whole different way of looking at that. But I mean, light, when he said, let there be light, order, structure, Torah, Yeshua, all that stuff was brought into everything right there, day 1. That brought the chaos and confusion into structure. Okay? And that's the metaphor and picture that we need to have. We are born out of darkness into light physically. We're born out of darkness into light spiritually. Anybody out here want to say they weren't in darkness before he called you? Okay. Some of us still are in a good amount of darkness now as we're wanting more and more light so that we can get that all cleared up in our lives. And so the picture is, to be somewhat punny, I guess, but the picture is very clear. Okay? That's why he gives us eyes to see, so we can see these things, right? You know, you could do the same thing with the ears to hear, you know, the noise of the chaos and confusion that he then brings clarity to. So we have ears to hear as well. Because the darkness is chaos and confusion. It's tohu vabohu. It's you can't see. There's no clarity as to where to go. There's no light to guide us. Well, the same thing with the hearing. You've got all that noise. There's noise on the internet. There's noise in your head. There's noise in your congregations. There's noise everywhere. And you need to have ears to hear that voice, the still small voice that's trying to get your attention. And then you get to my sheep hear my voice. Okay? There we go.